It's the MyMichelleLive podcast.
MyMichelleLive, SCI TECH Talk, taking the God story to a geeky place. Well, here's Michelle.
Welcome to SCI TECH Talk. I am Michelle Mendoza as we get ready to say goodbye and good riddance to this year and look to a new year and new hope. Hey, did you realize that for the first time in history, truly hindsight will be 2020 come January 1st as we look to the new year? We ask the question, what if? What if we could say goodbye to the coronavirus? What if things open up? What's happening in the future? It is much like looking at science fiction. Science fiction, it is said, asks the question, what if?
What is science fiction? Well, science fiction is not about predicting the future. The future doesn't exist. Science fiction is here to prevent and invent the future. Prevent and invent the future. Preventing the future in a sense that science fiction can tell us the danger that future holds for us, but it can also help us invent the future and make sure that the future is without those dangers that I was talking about. Preventing, inventing the future, not predicting.
And that's from Etienne Augi from a TED Talk from Erasus University in Holland, asking some questions about science fiction and realizing how important science fiction truly is to us. After all, as he said in his TED Talk, it's the biggest by far movie draw of any type of genre.
The most profitable movies in Hollywood are science fiction movies. I put here the list of the 15 most profitable movies of Hollywood. Well, actually, the 15 most profitable movies of all time. And if you got them, I put in white, I put the science fiction movie. Half of the 15 movies are science fiction, the other half is fantasy. Only 2 movies will be considered normal, Titanic and Skyfall, which is honestly more science fiction than real life.
Science fiction has even brought us to the realities and the technology that we have today.
Probably seen Star Wars in 1977 when the movie was released. It was a huge hit, to say the least. And it was such a huge hit that everybody was talking about Star Wars. And there was a convention of science fiction writers that took place. And one of them said, these are his words, he said, wouldn't it be cool to have like a real Star Wars? And when he said that, everybody around him was like, yeah, dude, that would be totally cool. But one person was very interested by what he had to say. And this person was the assistant of Ronald Reagan. He came back, spoke to Reagan. You know Reagan, ex-actor, very good in communication, understand the power of a good story to inspire people. And Reagan gave in '83 the Star Wars speech when he explained that now America had to win the race to space, the other race to space. And the idea of Star Wars, of the real Star Wars, was called a Strategic Defense Initiative. Now, Star Wars is not what ended the Cold War, but probably it contributed to the end of Cold War. That's also the power of science fiction. It's profitable, it's innovative, and when it comes to governance, it's also something extremely important for governments. It inspires people about their future.
So while all of that is amazing, looking for the future, looking to the future, we often also think going forward, being more advanced, we really need to take off the shackles of the old antiquated ways of thinking, namely religion, faith, that kind of stuff, the Bible.
For so long in America, we've had this idea that science and faith are not compatible. A poll suggests that 59%, almost 60% of Americans say that science and religion do conflict. But it's mostly the people who don't have faith or religion that boost up those numbers. People of faith say, I don't see a conflict, but I guess, would you? We're going to be delving a bit into that today. I think it's a fascinating subject. But we're also going to get a look at education, science, faith, science fiction even, melding together to enhance
our new year,
our next generation, and education. Now, my first guest, I think this makes the whole day worthwhile. I am so looking forward to this interview. When you think of, I'm not lying, I know the next generation is much more in tune with gaming and science fiction than maybe the basics of education. I mean, you can make them quote facts and figures, but you ask them some details on Star Wars, whatever gaming world they happen to be in, and they've got statistics.
But I want you to know, we can look to the science fiction world. We can look to speculation of the future thinking. And when we find nuggets of truth, things that are powerful and moving and life-changing, oh my goodness, we can also look back and see that there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new in the universe. Those ideas have been around, well, since the Bible.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Well, we're going to boldly go to our next guest, who says all he really needed to know he learned from watching Star Trek, and that's the name of his book. All I really need to know I learned from watching Star Trek. Dave Marinaccio is our guest. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Sure thing, Michelle. And I should point out right off the bat that a lot of people, when they think of the next generation, they think of Jean-Luc Picard and Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Make it so. Make it so. Make it so.
There he is right
Make
there,
it so.
Jean-Luc Picard.
We even had the new Picard series come out this year.
Make it so.
And I think it's real funny that we're taking on this issue today because I have been binge watching The Next Generation in the last week or so. So it's been kind of interesting. And as I knew you and I were going to have this conversation today, I was trying to find out if there is something I can learn from The Next Generation. If you're just joining us, Dave Marinaccio is with us. He's an international best-selling author, formerly in the advertising industry, and obviously a sci-fi fan to a degree. He's written a book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned from Watching Star Trek. And I want to hear some of the things that we can glean from Star Trek, because many of us grew up on it. I mean, it was there my entire life. But there is a story here. We are desperately trying to get the next generation of our children to embrace our values, to grow into productive members of society.
As we look at a whole new year,
in some ways, it feels like we're failing, and yet this is one connection that we can make, that maybe we can share with the next generation some of the things we gleaned. Star Trek. What are some of your favorite lessons, Dave?
I can tell you some, but I just want to pick up on what you just said, because
Okay.
you're really to the heart of the matter. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in the 60s, he created a morality play, and
Well put.
and that's in a way, that's one of the reasons that Star Trek has worked its way into the popular culture as much as it has. It really did pass on a lot of the values and morals of America in the shows. And you asked for an example. I'll give you a great example. Whenever there's a distress call, the Enterprise answers it immediately. Okay, and what's a great lesson, that no matter what you're doing, even if you're off on some other mission, or you have something in front of you, or you have a job to do, when someone calls for help, you should go to that person to help. And it's funny if you think about it, because we love to help our friends all the time, especially when they don't need it. Like, hey, you're parking that car wrong, or you missed a spot, right? But the time to really help people is when they need it, and you see this on the Enterprise all the time. A lot of the shows will start with a distress call, and no matter what the Enterprise and the captain and the crew are doing, they immediately drop everything and they go to help.
That's a good life lesson, and it's part of watching our values come into play. There were even values in Star Trek, the original series especially, that dealt with issues, and I would say in other Star Trek episodes of other The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, but particularly in the 60s, dealing with race, dealing with differing people coming together, not just race, but species coming together.
The amazing thing about Star Trek was that shows that would not get on the air if they were on a regular TV show could be dressed up in a very lame costume and be dealt with like racism, like constant warfare, like the unknown. One of the real simple lessons you learn watching Star Trek is that if you mess something up, it's your responsibility to fix it. Say, for example, you go back in time and cause the Nazis to win World War II. Well, that means that you have to go back, let Joan Collins walk in front of a car to be killed, even though you're in love with her, because it's your duty to fix up the mess you made.
Wow. And you really think about the consequences. Those were, when you think of Star Trek, or you think of time travel, you think of other sci-fi shows, Doctor Who, for example. When you think of messing with time, we start playing God in a way, and you really realize that time is this wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey thing that is really more to it than a mere human can control.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you think about humans in 1966 when the Cold War was everywhere, one of the messages, simple messages of Star Trek was, we survived. We survived the Cold War. And not only that, when you look on a bridge in the Enterprise, we not only survived, we all get along.
Would it be amazing if we could say we survived 2020 and look at us now, we all get along? I don't know if that's possible. That puts the fiction in this science fiction scenario. But you're saying the lessons of Star Trek give us something that we can look to and maybe emulate and hope for.
I mean, what a wonderful, positive way to look at the future, especially in a time of so much chaos in the world in the 1960s.
Right, right. So we learned a lot about interspecies, which is we can use in lieu of interracial issues, and race being an issue today, of how people get along, not just because we have similarities, but celebrating the things that we have that are different as well. I think that's kind of tough in our society today, and it's often tough for the next generation. We have a lot of little melting snowflakes in colleges that are easily offended because you have an idea different than mine, and I need a safe space from you.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, and I'm telling you, Captain Kirk would never put up with that.
If you look at how they treat themselves, how they treat each other, everybody it treats each other decently and with respect on the bridge. And not only that, the reason that the ship functions so smoothly is that everyone concentrates on and does their own job. You know, Uhura is communication. She doesn't tell Scotty how to run the engines, and Scotty is the engineer. He doesn't tell Sulu how to navigate. Everybody on that job, everybody on that ship, everybody on that bridge has a job, and everybody focusing on their own job is what enables them to all work together and to accomplish more than they ever could individually. Dave
Marinaccio is with us. He's written the book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned from Watching Star Trek. I think that is so fun, so cool. What a great, someone had to come up with that book. For the last couple of weeks, I've been binge watching The Next Generation, and I realized I gleaned something. There is a Starfleet regulation for everything. You always know what you're supposed to do, and I'm going back to my faith roots, the Bible and the golden rules. There's a rule for that. There's a Starfleet regulation for that, right?
Absolutely, there is, and that allowed me to write an entire book, because every situation you will face in your life has already been faced by the captain and crew with the Enterprise. So there's a nugget in there for almost any situation. Like, even things like how do I handle visitors? Well, the first thing, if you handle visitors, what you want to do is change the environment of the ship to make it comfortable for your visitor.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay? When my sister visits, I use a comforter that she likes, and it makes the spare bedroom comfortable for her. And so that's how we should think about treating visitors. Now, on the Enterprise, sometimes they have to change the atmosphere of the room or change the eating habits or what it is. But it's a really simple lesson that's easy to follow.
Great lessons from the future, from sci-fi, are really in some ways rooted in biblical ideas from long ago. The Bible says, hey, we are not of this world. We're in this world, but not really of it. Sound familiar? And then you think of meeting people where they're at, as you just said. The Bible says, I have become all things to all people that I might, by all means, save some. We meet people where they're at. So old lessons beamed into the future, and boom, you've got some words to live by.
And here is back to where we started this conversation, Dave. This is why it's so, we laugh at it and we think it's adorable, and that's what a great idea for a book, and tongue in cheek. But there is a seriousness to this, and what it comes down to is, yes, America does have values. Yes, America does have a set of rights and wrongs, and we saw it play out for the last 50 years in a television series that kind of celebrated, this is who we are. These are some of our values. Even if we took it out into the great beyond and to search out new life and new civilization, we still bring our values with us. And I think that's the magic, beyond just the fun of it, the magic to all I really need to know I learned from watching Star Trek. Dave, what a fun interview. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Michelle.
On this Science and Technology Talk, we're looking not only to the future, 2021, a new year, looking to get out of 2020, looking towards the next iteration of technology, health, vaccines, whatever it may be, but also looking to the next generation, because they really are our help. Answers in Genesis a while back did a survey on what the next generation believes, or more specifically, what they no longer believe.
According to this survey, it can give us a little insight into why so many of our youth reject their faith. Almost half. In fact, some surveys say more than half reject their faith by the time they graduate from college. Patrick Roy, he is with Genesis Apologetics. He is our guest today. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Michelle, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for the invite. I appreciate it.
Oh, good to have you. This is a really interesting survey. You tell them what's right, you tell them what's wrong, you send them off to college, and you bite your fingernails hoping that they stay true to the values that you've implanted.
Exactly. Michelle, I've actually, the statistic you just quoted, that more than half of students will reject their faith by the time they're done with college. I hate that statistic, and so I wanted to find out if it was true. So I actually took a microphone and a camera out to our local college campus, and I spent time talking to probably more than 100 students over several different days. And, boy, I found out that statistic is true. I looked in the eyes of student after student after student that told me that they were raised in a Christian home, they went to youth group, they went to church regularly, and now they were calling themselves atheists. Matter of fact, as I interviewed people, I only came across two students. It was a couple. It was a guy and a gal who said that they still held to believing that the Bible was true. So, Michelle, when I go out there, I actually see that it's true, and I look into the eyes of the students, and it's just it's a shameful thing. It's really horrible.
Let me just say this from a reporter point of view, not from a faith girl point of view, that what's terrible about that is not just the faith aspect. It is, okay, what's the result? And as a reporter, you're going to look at, okay, this is happening, and what is the result? Kind of a little more clinical. Our students are less happy. They have less joy. There is a differing attitude when you don't have that element of faith that we were created with.
Yeah, Michelle, imagine the difference between a student who believes that they came about by random chance processes, that they're nothing more than molecules that just happen to come together, and there is no real meaning or purpose in life. There's no meaning to the universe. Now, compare that to a student who believes that they were created by a God who knew them before the foundations of the earth, knew their name, knows how many hairs they have on their head, and has ultimate purpose for them. How are those two lives going to play themselves out? I mean, it's amazing.
It really is. When you think of it that way, it is really it's very profound. And yet here we are, and I have to say, every Tuesday we take on science and technology and faith. I thought that this, to be honest with you, Pat, I thought that this segment, we would do once in a while. I have so much material to cover every single week where science just shows the greatness of God's creation, and it's faith building, and I see no conflict with my faith or with my reading of the Bible. It's astounding, but that information is not necessarily widely distributed.
Right, exactly. And Michelle, what you're saying makes total sense, because if God made the world, and he's also the God of the Word, both the Word and the world should be in 100% unity with each other. And the fun thing is, when you go out and investigate the world, we see that what God told us is absolutely true. But what's sad is so many Christians are scared to look at the evidence. They almost go through life with blinders on because they're scared that what they find is going to contradict what God says in his word.
Because we don't want to be proving that God's not right, or God's not, or I don't have an answer if it doesn't look like something's lining up. But that's not really God then. I mean, let me just challenge that. If that's how your mind is working, that's not really God. That's not, if your God doesn't have an answer to every question, even when it seems a little tight and a little tough, eventually it comes through, then he's not God.
Right, exactly. Great points.
Pat Roy is with us from Genesis Apologetics. It is so exciting to take on the idea of science, faith, and even the next generation. Our kids today are kind of being sold a bill of goods. And this is something, it's a pet peeve of mine, Pat, the idea of it's settled science.
Right, exactly. It's not. And what people don't realize is that there are actually hundreds and hundreds of creation scientists from all around the world in all different disciplines of science that are actually showing that you can't trust evolution, that evolution is actually scientifically bankrupt, and the Big Bang idea and all of those things actually aren't science. They're religion themselves.
Yes, and
so, Michelle, listen, we wanted to find out how to reach teens. We wanted to find out what they thought were the best evidences. So we decided that we were going to do a survey because we wanted to become the most effective we could at reaching students. I was wondering if I could share the results of our survey with you.
Yes.
And this is a survey that took place a couple of years ago, but it is still so profound today. Go ahead.
Pollfish to do the survey for us, and the survey actually took place at checkout on Amazon. And we actually surveyed 292 teens between the ages of 14 and 24. And they provided 404 responses to the question, what are the best evidences for evolution? Now, we didn't have check boxes. They actually had an open-ended question that they could answer. Here's what we found out that surprised us. 72% of the answers fell into four categories. So here they are. 25% of them said that they believed that the human evolution from an ape-like creature to modern humans was the most convincing proof of evolution. Michelle, we can talk about that, but as you know, there are major gaps in that transition. We don't see it.
Although there are some people that I have met, but we won't go down there. Next.
Okay, that's funny. 21% of them said that it was evolution theory proper that convinced them. In other words, mutations, which actually lose information, and natural selection that can only choose from what's there, they believed that could turn a single cell into a complex human being. That was 21%. 15% believe that the fossil records and the transitions in the fossil record, and actually, Michelle, as you already know, there really aren't any. There should be hundreds of thousands, but yet we're missing those. 15% of them thought that was the best proof for evolution. And then 11% said that it was the authority of science itself. In other words, because all of the other scientists say it, it must be true.
There are some problems I have with that. Now, first, it sounds like not only do we know that there are gaps in evolution, but it sounds like there's real serious gaps in our education. If our young people really believe this, I can see saying, well, I tend to think this way, but it goes back to that settled science idea. That's the whole idea of science, is that it's never really settled. You keep challenging it and poking at it and prodding it and seeing if it stands up. But the authority of science, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's kind of how we're wired, Michelle, is that if everybody else believes it, it must be true. I mean, we see that affecting society all the time, right? So actually, it's not so surprising that kids say, well, boy, my professor seems awfully smart, and they've been trained, and boy, everybody else believes in evolution, so it must be true.
Interesting. So I had a very left-wing growing up. You know, that was my education. That was my family. They were really left-wing, kind of left-wing radical extremists to a degree, right? And interesting about that, though, is it's oftentimes the left wing that's so militant now. But the idea of liberalism, at least when I was growing up, was challenge authority. Don't take anyone's word for it. You know, challenge what they have to say. And now that in some ways there's more of a liberal ruling of the education system, it is don't challenge what we have to say.
Right, exactly.
Human nature.
An interesting shift, exactly.
Yeah. Human nature
Michelle,
steps
what we're
in.
finding out, too, I've talked to lots and lots of young people, and here's what I'm finding out, by the way. A lot of times they're sitting in class, right, and the professor is teaching evolution and teaching it a lot of times as fact. Now, there's some good Christian teachers out there, and there's some people that aren't this way, but a lot of times the professor is just teaching it hardcore as fact, and no students will say anything. Well, here's what I found. I've talked to a lot of teenagers, and if one kid, just one kid, will have the guts to not stand up, but actually, raise their hand and just ask a question. And it could be a simple question like, how did non-living materials become alive? If one student asks that question, what I've noticed happens in the classroom is other students will begin to realize that they can also ask questions. And as soon as you ask a question, the psychology of it all is that all of a sudden the rest of the students will realize, hey, the professor doesn't know everything after all. And all of a sudden, it almost kind of breaks that spell of authority that they have.
And if you've seen the movie God's Not Dead, it's a little bit of the thesis of it, or the theme of it.
Listen to the trailer from this movie back in 2016 as we move forward into 2021 and try to disassociate ourselves with old, ancient thinking. Are we really moving forward?
In this day and age, people seem to forget that the most basic human right of all is the right to believe.
No prayers, no moments of silence, nothing.
Think of the other children out there who are subjected to their repressive belief system.
If we sit by and do nothing, the pressure that we're feeling today will mean persecution tomorrow. We're at war.
What makes nonviolence so radical is its unwavering commitment to a nonviolent approach.
Isn't that sort of like what Jesus meant when he said that we should love our enemies?
Yes. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
One of your students sent a text to their parents. Did this happen?
If you're asking whether I responded to a student's question, yes.
And your answer incorporated the words of Jesus.
What were you thinking, Grace?
How do we make this go away and not get blood on our hands?
We let the ACLU do it.
We're going to prove once and for all that God is dead.
You insist that a Christian's right to believe is subordinate to all other rights? Then it's not a right.
You are out of order. I charge you with contempt.
I accept the charge because I have nothing but contempt for these proceedings.
God's not dead. He's surely alive. He's living on the inside, rolling like a lion.
But this is where we need to get back in education, because as smart as our professors can be, of course they don't know everything. And of course we should be asking questions. It shouldn't be just about the regurgitation of knowledge, or what's being implanted in us, but the asking of questions, the learning, the prodding, the growing.
Exactly. See, that's what education should be all about, right, is asking sincere questions.
Yeah.
And that's what I always tell Christians to do in the classroom, is just ask questions. Well, how do you know that's true? How do you know that this became this? Or how do we know that dinosaurs evolved into birds? How did their scales become feathers? How did their arms transition? How did they learn how to fly? Just ask sincere questions and do it politely and with sincerity. And a lot of times what you'll be doing by standing up in your classroom like that is actually helping the other students to realize that the professor doesn't know it all and that there's some big gaps in evolutionary theory.
And indeed, not just the gaps in the theory, but really the open-mindedness of being able to discuss issues and not come at it with, well, this is just the way it is, and if you think differently, let me demonize you, tear you down, straw man argument you. It's a plague on our society. And we can even admit that within the Christian realm, there are a host of scientists, brilliant people that do run the gamut from evolution to young earth and all kinds of things in between. But we have this one thing in common, that we believe in a sovereign God who created all these things.
Because as one author said, it's evidence that demands a verdict. If we see the incredible design, intelligence, mathematics, finely tuned, fine balance, brains, and even some of the lower life forms that rival what we can do with computers. I mean, you don't see a Macintosh sitting on someone's desk with a Word document. Well, I guess you don't see a Word document with a document open on it and say, wow, I wonder how that just accidentally happened.
Right, exactly. And isn't that the neat thing about America is we're allowed to ask questions. We're allowed to question what people are teaching us. And as Christians, we always want to be in the pursuit of truth, right? We should always be asking questions and then comparing those answers to what the Scripture says, right? So that's kind of what learning is all about, is being able to ask those questions.
Those issues that the young people brought out, they're very challengeable. It doesn't take much in the way of education to be able to challenge each one of those ideas. That gives us some ground to understanding the next generation.
Pat Roy has been our guest. He's with Genesis Apologetics Academy. Great to get in touch with. We'll have a link, of course, on all of our podcasting venues. Also with Answers in Genesis.
Such a joy to have you with us.
Hey, Michelle, thank you so much. And I just want to mention, too, that we have got all kinds of training videos and all kinds of other materials for students. Just contact us at debunkevolution.com. It's debunkevolution.com.
debunkevolution.com, and indeed you have great resources. And if you're a homeschooling parent,
okay, and many of us who unwittingly have gotten roped into being homeschool parents, like it or not,
you need to go to their website because there's a lot of good references, books, things to really help you along the way. Thank you, Pat.
Michelle, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
As we move forward into 2021, is it time we put away the old, get rid of 2020, all the garbage that came with it, and a lot of that old backwards thinking about faith, and move into a realm of science and faith, completely incompatible. Let's just go on from here, right? Listen.
Richard, what's more important if you had a choice, which is to explain science or destroy religion?
Promoting a scientific worldview is something of great value.
There's no one whose views are not subject to question.
Science is wonderful. Science is beautiful. Religion is not wonderful. It's not beautiful. It gets in the way.
With some of the stuff you do really upsets some people. Would you prefer that it was just...
No, I think these are wonderful things. People shouldn't be threatened by science.
I think it's very important to advance the pro-science view in the modern world. It can only be a good thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, the dynamic duo of science.
What a disgusting idea. I'm not saying this is the way it is, you better believe it or else.
And that's the point about beliefs. They don't change the facts. Facts, if you're rational, should change your beliefs.
And should they, scientists? Because they're saying, hey, you shouldn't be threatened by science. Well, science, you shouldn't be threatened by faith either. People shouldn't be threatened by science. I also say, right on, no way. But science, you shouldn't be threatened by faith. Could science itself be a religion? That's the question.
Religious apologists and fundamentalists often accuse science of being just another system of belief, and they tend to equate belief with faith. Therefore, they postulate science is a matter of faith, and as such is just another religion.
Well, and to a degree, could that be true? When you make assumptions and say, no, this is truth, and in fact use that idea of settled science, do we get to the point where it becomes a religion of its own.
Settled science. Settled science is the phrase politicians use when they want more power for themselves, and then tell us that debate is not allowed because it's settled science. Science is never settled.
Science is never settled, and that's why absolutely getting any kind of idea of a creator or faith completely out of the picture is saying that science is afraid of God. Instead of saying, yeah, you have an idea that there's a God, bring it. We're going to put it to the scientific test. We're going to dig into that and see if we can disprove you. We're going to prove you wrong. But it never, ever worked. There is a host of many people, brilliant thinkers, scientists, authors, thinkers, philosophers who have said, this religious thing keeps getting in the way. Once and for all, I am going to prove it wrong, and then they end up becoming pastors. So, it's a dangerous road to go down. And the question that I'm asking today, one of many, is can we find balance? Has there ever been balance between science and faith?
I think it's more of a problem in the United States than it is other places. I mean, there's some places where science is less of an issue, and there's other places where faith is less of an issue. But in the United States, it's very nicely juxtaposed, and I think it's actually a very good dynamic. I think if I were, I think part of the problem is there's a tendency to focus on the extremes. It makes for good press and for book sales and so forth. And I think there's a lot more need for meeting in the middle, which is finding ways that you can, if you really don't know something, just admit you don't know something. If you don't know for sure that you can't rule out an intelligent designer, then teach it in schools. If science is so fragile that they can't teach exactly how you would question things and discover things, then I think we need to work on that.
Yeah, science. Buck up, science. Get over it. Don't be so afraid of that God problem, because guess what? Science doesn't actually know everything. In fact, they can't explain everything.
These days, it feels like scientists have conquered the universe. But believe it or not, there are still some mysteries that even scientists don't understand. Here are things science can't explain. Why is ice slippery? Why do we sleep? When we're asleep, why do we dream? Why do we blush? Why do we laugh? Why do we yawn? Why is yawning contagious? How did one man survive climbing Mount Everest in just his shorts? Why does the flu virus have a season? What makes lightning? How does hot water freeze faster than cold water? It does, trust me. Why does it look like these rocks in Death Valley are moving? What's up these dark stripes on Mars? Why do ants work as a colony? Why do cats purr? How do animals migrate thousands of miles on land and sea without the use of GPS, even though we can't and we're supposed to be the geniuses on this planet? Why are there more right-handed people than left? What happens when you fall in a black hole? I mean, one theory is you run into the edge of the universe. Is that right? How is the sun's atmosphere actually hotter than it is on its surface? How can Saturn have a perpetual hurricane when there's no water? What's up with dark matter? What's up with dark energy? Where are all the aliens? Really? In theory, we should have met some aliens by now. And forget space, the really weird stuff is at the bottom of the ocean. What's going on down there? We've only explored 5% of it. You know what? I am not a scientist.
Nor am I, but we're taking on science and technology today. And as we continue,
and we look towards a new year and new thinking and new technology,
we almost view it as though science is the savior of our century, that somehow science has saved humanity from the superstitious, backwards religious thinking that used to happen, thousands of years ago when man was crawling out of the ooze. Are there still some flat earthing, fanatical folks still hanging on to the myth and legend of faith and religion while the rest of humanity moves towards more evolved thinking? I mean, can we just admit that in our society, we have this idea that science and faith have not, should not, and have never, ever mixed, right? Well, maybe not so much. When we really look back at science, you might even ask yourself if the Bible could have been the first book of science.
In fact, modern science was birthed in the 17th century because of a belief in an unchanging God of order, purpose, and consistency. The God portrayed in the Bible. It is filled with numerous medical and scientific facts and has been at the forefront of modern-day science. When scientists thought that the Earth was flat, the Bible described the true shape of the Earth and how it is suspended on nothing. Before oceans were explored, the Bible knew of the existing valleys and fountains and springs down in its depths. It even mentioned the hydrologic cycle with great clarity thousands of years before science even had a drop of insight.
Uh-oh, science-thinking people, don't be offended. Guess what? Today we're mixing the thought of religion and science. And we decided to do it with someone much smarter than me. Our guest holds a doctorate in the history of science. Boom! Perfect for today. From the University of Oklahoma, and was a Fulbright scholar. You got to get this book. It's unbelievable. Well, the book is unbelievable. No, really. What? No, that's the name of the book. It's unbelievable. 7 myths about the history and future of science and religion. Oh, we got to get into this. So without further ado, Michael Newton Keyes.
Hey, Michelle, thanks for having me back. You know, back in November, that was my very first radio interview. It was with you about my book. Now this is 30 interviews later, approximately.
Yay! Right on. I spoiled it for the rest of them, huh? I was like, this isn't as fun. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. I'm so excited to have you back. I really am. This is where we're at in America, where we have this idea that science and faith don't mix. And it is surprising that not all of the rest of the world thinks that way. Who knew?
Yeah, I think, after a quarter century of teaching science, particularly astronomy and biology and their history to college students, I kept running across these stories that get recycled over and over. And when you dig down deep into them, you find they're just pure myth. And so thus the title, Unbelievable, 7 Myths. And I think that the other thing I would say to your audience is my science teaching was to people who didn't have science backgrounds. So I really love communicating this stuff to just the general public.
Because the general public, it's as though we've gotten a little bit, can I almost say brainwashed? We're told that there is no background of faith and science, that actually science is what got us out of the dark ages. Science is what kind of pulled us out like someone hanging onto a lifeline out of this backwater thinking that some god or gods are up there making that strange golden orb in the sky shining down at us, and all of the things that we can't explain. We just say, oh, it must be God. And so science explains that, so why do we need God?
Right. And it's funny because in the book I kind of turn the tables and say, look, it was actually belief in the supernatural creation of the cosmos that gave these early modern scientists the expectation and confidence that they could discover mathematically elegant natural laws, because they knew that the world had been formed by a maximally rational lawgiver. So you should expect to find those regularities, and then Kepler and Newton and Galileo, they found lots of them, and they're still taught today with modifications, of course, over the years.
Do you think it's fair, though, to say that in some ways, even as we see the idea of settled science is not new, that there were people, even religious thinkers of the day, that felt that anybody bringing new ideas and saying, maybe the earth isn't the center of the universe. Heresy, burn them at the stake. So while we say that in some ways science challenges religion, that there may be some truth to that.
Yeah, the case study in that is the Galileo affair, where it looked like it was Galileo representing science versus religion, the Catholic Church. But I actually have a chapter on that, and he discovered some interesting things through his telescope, the first telescope ever, that, for example, that Venus goes through phases kind of like our moon does, which you can't see with the naked eye, but once you get the telescope, you can see that. And he tried to make the case that this proved that Earth moves around the sun, with Venus having a smaller orbit contained within Earth's orbit, which would give you that appearance of these moon-like phases. He was right about that. But there was another alternative also available at the same time that kind of took the best of the old Earth-centered system and this new Copernican system, and this sort of hybrid between the two called the Tychonic system after a guy named Tycho. It also made sense of the same phases of Venus without Earth moving, Earth still being at rest, but and the Catholic Church largely lined itself up with this hybrid view, which said that the sun goes around the Earth, and in turn, Mercury and Venus go around the sun, which would give you the very phases that Galileo saw through his telescope. So Galileo actually failed to prove the Copernican system. That came a generation later. So it really was the majority of scientists rejecting a minority viewpoint, Galileo, and the best evidence still was on the side of a stationary Earth at that time. Of course, now it's obvious the Earth moves. But at that time, it really wasn't clear, Michelle. And so Galileo overstated his case and got in trouble with not all theologians. Only the majority of Catholic theologians eventually sided against Galileo, but he had his friends within the church. So it wasn't science versus religion. It was two views of science competing and two views of theology that were competing. That's a totally different picture than the one that you usually get.
That sounds an awful, and why I think this is so, your book is so brilliant and so very important, is that we forget history repeats itself. You're talking about things that happened in the 16th century, and I'm listening to it as though, wow, that could be today's headlines.
Yeah, I mean, there's discussion within even conservative evangelical Christians about whether the universe is old or young.
Indeed.
And that's the discussion that they have. And some think that the Bible is inconsistent with the young earth. I don't think it is. But it's very similar to the Galileo affair. And these things eventually get worked out over time. So, it's not science versus religion. It's different interpretations of the Bible and different interpretations of nature. So, exactly.
And I guess the question is, because we really cannot disprove that there is a God, why is science so afraid of God anymore?
Yeah, I like the way you frame that in your kind of setup for our chat here. Yeah, well, if religion is always vanquished by science, then why are so many scientists so threatened by like the kind of things I bring out in my book, that Christianity has been so helpful in supplying some of the ideas that got modern science going, and that roughly half of American scientists believe in God. So, and that stayed about the same over the last century because there have been polls taken. So there are a lot of very religious, people who are scientists. They really do not just coexist, but really go well together.
Not only that, but the Bible itself is, and I've said this many times on the show, it's kind of Twilight Zone-y in that you can read through it and find that the things that it touches on that are science-related completely defy the known science of the time it was written. That is unique to the Bible. There is really no other book of antiquity that goes beyond the scientific knowledge of the day. They stick to what was the going belief. So there's some weird Twilight Zone-y things there.
Yeah, one example of what you were talking about, where the Bible has a statement that did seem to be in conflict with science, but later science caught up with the Bible, is there's several references in the Psalms to the heavens growing old like a garment. That is, that the heavens are not incorruptible or they're not eternal. They actually have, stars fall apart and, grow old. And that wasn't really discovered until, really wasn't put on a very firm basis until the 17th century. And yet that had been in the Bible all along. So, and that has theological importance, because the idea is that the universe is not intended to last forever. It's got a finite age to it. And so that's a good example of that. And I think, and we have early modern scientists who actually, like Johannes Kepler, who actually cited that verse and said, look, this is what we're finding in science. They're consistent.
And so why be afraid? So since we have about a minute left together, I wanted to ask you the perplexing byline that says in your book, Unbelievable, 7 myths about the history and future. And to me, that's perplexing. Future of science and religion. Yeah. Because in our age, it's as though we say science and religion, they no more shall the twain meet. Can you comment on that quickly?
Yeah. Well, I think that the resources that made early modern science flourish can be reappropriated for particularly the with my colleagues at Discovery Institute who think that the evidence for design points to a designer. And science won't tell you who the designer is, but when you look at the history of science, there are a lot of scientists who believe that that was God. And so there should be no embarrassment to think, well, I think, we can actually experience God personally. And there's evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, which gives evidence that God actually interacted with us. So I think Christianity is important for the future of science because it does encourage rationality. Whereas in my very last myth, which we don't have time to talk about, naturalists or atheists are saying that when ET comes, it'll be like magic, and really have totally made people believe that anything could happen, even something that looks like magic could be natural. So the whole difference between natural and supernatural is breaking down under modern atheism, whereas Christianity helps us to think more critically. So I think it's important for the future of science.
Oh, indeed, indeed. It has been a little bit since you've been on, and I'd like for you to come on again sooner because every time we talk, it is so much fun. Will you join us again soon, Michael?
Okay, Michelle.
All right. Good. Love it. Michael Newton Keyes, the book is unbelievable, and it is 7 Myths About the History and Future of Science and Religion. Of course, Michael is a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute.
It's been a pleasure taking on science and technology with you today, looking into 2021 with great hope and anticipation, but also a lot of unknowns. So if you're seeking for something deeper, we look for the God story here. And if you are interested in finding the God story or sharing the God story like this, share it. Get the word out. We're doing something important here, and you're coming along for the ride, I hope. I'm Michelle Mendoza. This is Science and Technology, MyMichelleLive.
More SciTech Talk at MyMichelleLive.com.